drawn me from the darkness into glorious light. Glory to his name. Glory to his name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to his name. Jesus is in this room, here right now, making this place I stand, holy ground, holy ground. Your spirit,
It's good to have you this morning. Glad you're here. once again, just give you a little informal presentation here. This is my friend, Dr. Daniel Janosik. He's helped me tremendously. He's been my teacher and a mentor for me. He's very skilled in what he's talking about today. He knows it well. And this is it's a teaching time for us to get better equipped in dealing with the things that are coming at us as a culture. And so I'm thankful that he's here with us. And so sit back and enjoy as he shares some great truths with us this morning. He's already did a great job at 8:15. He's going to be back at 10:30. So don't leave after this one. Just hang tight and get it, and then come back tonight. We'll have some question and answer session, and it's going to be good stuff today. God bless you, brother. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Let's just open with a quick prayer. Father, thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for this church. Thank you for Bill and our friendship, and just what I see in the church, a love for you and a desire to do right under you. And I pray that this would be a helpful presentation and that you would use it in the lives of the people here. And guide me, help the equipment to work well. And I pray this all in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Okay, well, it's good to be back. This is a series, so I'm putting something different in each one. It's building. And what we're going to look at today is the Great Reset. So if I can get the picture up there. Okay, so the Great Reset, the newest strategy to rule the world. And it is a strategy that I will show you is not a conspiracy, because they come out, the leaders, the world leaders in this, come out very definitely, very clearly and say, this is what we're going to do. And you will be surprised because they had a lot to do with this COVID period. And that's what's really interesting. I'm not going to go into that too much, but that's behind. Or for sure they used it greatly to their advantage. So the Great Reset. Why is there so much confusion? Interestingly, you have a man who wants to be a woman. Why? Because he's a mediocre swimmer as a man, and he found out that he can win if he swims against the girls. We used to call that shameful. Where is shame in the world today? It's gone. There's no shame. There's only corruptness. So you have Thomas. Is it William Thomas? William Thomas or William Lee? Yeah, his real name. On the right, you have a woman who cannot say what a woman is, and yet she's now a Supreme Court justice. Now, she refrained from that because she didn't want to, push sides. But we have a lot of confusion, and that's being pushed. Why? Because it's deconstructing our whole society. Because our society is built upon biblical principles of a man and a woman and a marriage that's based in God's purview. And this is interesting. Printing more money will help solve inflation and our debt problem. But look at what Stephanie Kelton said on modern money theory. The United States government can never run out of money. They can just print it. Well, if they can print it, then why do we have to pay taxes? Just have them print it again. But, yeah, right. So if you, as an individual, take your made-up money and you try to use that, you go to jail because you don't have anything. If you don't have anything to back it up, it's illegal. So why is our government doing it? It's just ruining it for our children and grandchildren. Where is the sense, the common sense? Oh, there we go. So now we have this. Beware the Great Reset. And this is what I'm saying is not a conspiracy because we have a book, COVID-19, The Great Reset. You have a picture there of a happy Klaus Schwab. He's never happy in any of his pictures, but he is very powerful. He is the founder of the World Economic Forum back in the actually in the 70s, came into more power in the 90s. This is where they have the Great Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, where all the big wigs go in. You know, they all flew in their private planes saying we've got to be against climate change and the use of all these fossil fuels and everything, and hypocrites. But he says this: the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset the world. Well, they've been planning this for decades. And they even had an involvement in planning what would happen if we had a pandemic. A year before, they had a meeting in New York with Schwab and other leaders around the world, talking about what would happen if they had a pandemic, if they had a hyper virus released into the world. What would you do? Well, their projection then, according to their simulation, was that at least 50 million people would die. And now there are people in this group that say we're way overpopulated. We've got to reduce the population by at least half. And they would be glad for something like this. But they were trying to show what a pandemic would do and what controls needed to be put in place. So we've seen what controls they devised. This is what, okay, yeah. I guess I'm getting delay there. Okay, we're on the right side. Sorry. This is what Klaus Schwab says. To achieve a better outcome, the world must act jointly and swiftly to revamp all aspects of our societies and economics, from education to social contracts and working conditions. Every industry, from oil and gas to tech, must be transformed. In short, we need a great reset of capitalism. He goes on in his book, and he shows very clearly this is what we need to do. It's not a conspiracy. It is something that the world leaders have bought into. Even the new King of England is part of all of this, King Charles III. You see the reset button there, and right under his picture, the WEF, World Economic Forum, wants to push the reset button and create well-being for people and for the earth. It's one of the followers, Kate Whiting. These are the goals of the Great Reset. One, create a global utopia. Now, some of these are pretty positive, but we'll see the downside of them as we go through. Create a global utopia. We'll talk more. The last one that we do tonight will be on the Great Utopia and trying to compare that with the whole idea of utopia. 2, eliminate poverty. That's good. Distribute wealth so no one is in need. That's good, except when you start taking it away from everybody else to try to distribute it to those who aren't necessarily in the same need, as they say. 4, rebalance investment. And that gets kind of technical, especially with stakeholder capitalism and so on. Harness science and technology, but if you say anything against what they're doing, then you get canceled. Advance the transition to net zero carbon emission and so on. That's another story with the climate change, and that's one of the big forces that they're trying to use, and I'll show you that. Stabilize climate change. 8, create equality for all genders and races. Now, on one side, that's great, but how are they doing it? It's not so great. 9, govern with fairness and kindness. You've seen that kindness, haven't you, in the last 2 years? Okay, interesting. Okay, the real goals of the Great Reset. 1, control through climate change. Use climate change to bankrupt the West and destroy capitalism through Green New Deals. Where do they want to get all the money? From the rich countries to give to all the other countries. They can't afford all these things for green energy, so we've got to go ahead and dole out our money. 2, greater government control. Consolidate world power in the hands of the elites, governments, and heads of large corporations. Know that this is at the core. Those who have the power want more power. Power is always at the base. Money is just what they use to get there. 3, worldwide socialism, one world government control. Promote a stakeholder capitalism, which would force governments and corporations to succumb to a new type of socialism. So it's not capitalism as we know it. That's beneficial to everyone who works hard, but it is a very different beast. Okay, agenda of the Great Reset. Okay, the Great Reset calls for nothing less than a new social contract centered on human dignity and social justice. This is from the World Economic Forum itself. All of these things, this is what they want to do. Or, disrupt the current world order, use crises to promote rapid change. So they really jumped on the COVID bandwagon. They used it to their great advantage. 2, stakeholder capitalism, which we'll talk about a little bit later. You've heard of ESG, environment, social governance credentials. All the investment companies are being forced to adopt these measures, and it's devastating their outcome. Well, we've had such a prosperous time with investments in the last year. Yes. 4, diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, being propagated across all the campuses, the college campuses, into the high schools, all the way down to the grade school. And we'll see that it's not what it says it is. And then 5, globalism, controlled by the elites. This is their agenda, and we're going to break this down. Note, in order to accomplish their goals, the movement must first neutralize true Christianity and make it irrelevant. There is no place for God in the Great Reset. So we need to realize that and remember it. Okay? Kind of likes to go back to that first picture and then flip where we are. Stakeholder capitalism. Corporations would be required to balance or to be accountable for the costs and benefits they produce for society. So there's this push to do friendly things, but the friendly things are not so friendly with our money. This would force the corporations to bring more equity, sustainability, and governance, ESG, into their leadership. Those who fail to gain ESG credits, you got to make the score, may be left behind. And those would be the Christian institutions for the most part. Corporations would become bigger players in an even bigger and more intrusive global decision-making system. They're already creeping into all these. Well, BlackRock, largest investment company in the world, is totally pushing this and at the core of a lot of these ESG decisions. Stakeholder capitalism may be just another name for fascism, which in essence is the alliance of corporations and governments. Just think of this for a moment. Early in our country, we had a lot of churches that were the ones to provide aid to others, social action and so on. And a lot of that was good, except when they forgot the gospel. You look back in the history of Europe, and the monasteries provide a lot of the aid to the people around them. They let their lands. Remember, the papacy gave them their lands, but they used their lands for everybody. So the peasants could come and graze their sheep and their animals and everything on those lands. They didn't have to own them, and they had their little property, and they could survive well. But then the government came and said, well, we're going to dissolve the monasteries. We're going to take all those things away. They're too rich, and they were to some degree. But they also took the lands and divided them up among the lords and the elites. And then the people had to pay them and rent the land. They never could own it, and poverty came. Then the workhouses came. All these other devastating conditions developed because it was taken away from the church. Unfortunately, here in America, I see that the church really abdicated a lot of its responsibility as government took over. So the social welfare, the whole welfare system from the 60s on, has been devastating. So look at today. There are a lot of people who are not working who could work because they're getting more money by not working. I read several accounts just recently where there are families of 4 who are not working. They're getting over $80,000 to $100,000 a year. Some of them even in more than that for not working. And we're just giving it to them. So there's a lot of problems that we've got to deal with. The ESG, companies rated as ESG investments are supposed to be doing things that are good for the environment and social causes. If they're not, then they're rated lower, and they may not get the business, they may not be able to give out the loans and so on and survive. ESG is an attempt to separate out the good companies from the bad companies, they say, to help you make investment decisions. The World Economic Forum's ESG standards include 21 core metrics and 34 expanded metrics, and you've got to toe up to that in order to get the support. And you've got pillars and so on. ESG on the right side is a way of deciding who is in the club and who is out of the club. Basically what it is. It is not a certification. It is not necessarily better for the environment. You think of the EV batteries for the electrical vehicles. First of all, people who have them say, oh, well, you can, just plug it in and it's run on electricity. We're getting away from the fossil fuels. What they don't realize is that 80% of that electricity is produced by fossil fuels. You're still using the fossil fuels. Plus, the batteries, which are usually about 1,000 pounds, have all these rare minerals that are needed. And some of them come from select places. One comes from, I think, Niger. And about 70% of it comes from Niger. And at least half of the workforce that is producing that, digging it out, it's a lot of hard work, is slave labor. There's still slavery in the world today. In fact, it is estimated that there are over 50 million slaves. Now, some of those are in the slave trade. Some of those are in just domestic slavery. But you have a lot of them still in these countries, in Africa and around the world, Asia, even in America, where they are forced to work. 50 million. I can go on about that in other ways too. Often the ESG label is decided upon by political views. If they're on the right side of politics, then they get their pass. Thus, ESG scores could be used to disadvantage or cut off companies that do not comply. They cut off Tesla and Exxon. Well, Elon Musk is getting back at them for that. In fact, Elon Musk declared, ESG is a scam. It has been weaponized by phony social justice warriors. I hope he continues being a thorn in the flesh for them. Pray for him. He needs that. He needs to become a Christian. ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance, but what it really stands for is subordinating financial markets to a narrow ideological conception of social responsibility. ESG is now shorthand for a progressive takeover of the company. So you'll see that those initials over and over again. So be careful. It is being used by this great reset. ESG is an ideological virus injecting toxic politics into every aspect of our financial markets. And as you can see, that's coming from an opinion site of someone against this, but I think that what he says is very good. Then you have diversity, equity, and inclusion. I won't read the boxes there. Diversity, equity, inclusion, got to be diverse. So gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability status, some of that's good. We've got to be concerned about other people's needs, but diversity is blatantly prejudiced against certain other groups that used to be, well, they're called privileged. just regular groups. So diversity is blatantly prejudiced. The equity is hypocritically unequal. It's not for equality. It's to actually go against those that are qualified and bring in others because of certain characteristics that they have. And the demand for inclusion seeks to exclude anyone who will not accept the DEI agenda. So diversity, equity, and inclusion is fraudulent, hypocritical, and we need to be aware of that. It's based on some good efforts, but those efforts need to be under Christianity, because then it will have true biblical justice. We're not getting it through this. It's just very divisive. And it can be very complicated, as you see in this picture. Main components: steer the market toward fairer outcomes. 2, ensure that investments advance shared goals such as equality and sustainability. 3, harness the innovations of the 4th industrial revolution, the technology, to support the public good, especially by addressing health and social challenges. So they put out this great front, but you've got to look on the other side. Please look on the other side. You can see that its tentacles run through everything. You can't see that picture very well. If you get the slides, you will be able to. But this is from their own website, and it shows how they've already infiltrated everything. So, because it's complicated, so in a nutshell, the Great Reset is an attempt to seize the moment of the COVID-19 crisis to build a better society, where better means 3 things: greener, climate change; more digital, technology; and fair, according to them, equity, and so on. Back to the founder, Klaus Schwab. Again, the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. So I want to underline the whole idea that this is not a conspiracy theory. It is a conspiracy, but it's factual, and it's out front, and they're not afraid to say all these things because they believe that they are in the right. But what is the problem? This is where I found come on, okay. A good book to counter this. I'm not always with Glenn Beck, but he has a great team of researchers. And they put together this book on the Great Reset, and it just counters it point by point by point. So I've used this in one of my classes this past fall on cultural apologetics, and we went through all of these things. So a lot of these lectures are based on that. Okay, so a couple of problems here. And this is from Defending Gibraltar on Klaus Schwab. As we will see, he and his accomplices are using the COVID-19 crisis to bypass democratic accountability, to override opposition, to accelerate the agenda, and to impose it on the rest of humankind against our will in what he terms a great reset. So that's for dealing with his own book. Problem 2 is that they want to eliminate Christianity. They are vehemently opposed to Christianity because Christianity is the force that would not only neutralize them, it would devastate them. Our Western culture developed from a Christian worldview, and the Bible has been the central guide for the way we live. And as I mentioned, Tom Holland's book, Dominion, J. Warner Wallace, Person of Interest, showing the influence of Christ, who was the person of interest, and because of what he did, we have the greatest society that we've ever seen in the world. We used to. It's kind of fallen apart now, I think. The New World Order is based on a secular atheist worldview and therefore must throw out the Bible and make Christianity irrelevant. And you see that over and over again. So beware of that. Be prepared. Understand. Defend and refute. See if we can get to problem 3. There we go. Pushing climate change. It's kind of in the background now with the pandemic, but this is primarily being used. I mean, climate changes throughout time. And I was at the airport in November, DFW, waiting for my next plane. And I got to talking with this guy who was from Africa, I think Ethiopia. Ethiopia, yeah. Had a great talk. I think he came from a Christian background. And then there was a California woman, 50s, and from her, and she joined in. We were talking about some of these things, electric cars and so on. He designs cars, and she talked about her Tesla, and as we got into other things with climate change and so on, I could see that she was pretty much on the other side. She had bought into all this stuff. And she brought up climate change, and I had my laptop, and I said, well, you know, we often get a different picture, a truncated picture of what they want us to see. And Al Gore was very good about being able to do this. So I had a comparison of slides because she was saying, well, you know, all this fossil fuel and everything, it's just raising the temperature dramatically in the last couple decades. And yes, we have had the amount of carbon dioxide go up in our atmosphere. And we're blaming it on people, you know, all that we're doing, the factories and so on, the outpouring of this carbon dioxide. What we don't realize, though, is carbon dioxide is something that plants love. Remember, they take, remember your biology? I used to teach biology. I loved it. But plants take the carbon dioxide. They use the energy from the sun. They combine it with water that they take up in their roots, and they make food, carbohydrates. And that fuels the world. It fuels us. And you have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It's only about 0.04% now. You have more carbon dioxide, and those plants can get bigger, and they can grow faster, and they can produce more food, and so on. So up to a point, carbon dioxide is good. And yet, when you look at a lot of the charts that they will show for climate change, it's just the last 1,000 years. And so they show that, yeah, there's been an increase. Well, they forget the mini ice age and so on. But in the 1970s, where they were predicting another ice age coming, they forget that. But they talk about this last little tail there. Well, I had another chart that showed back in the time of the Etruscan period of the Greeks and the Romans, when there was a warmer period and they had much greater agricultural bounty. And then you had the time right before Christ where there was another peak. And then you had a peak in the 1300s, 1400s, where even England was growing grapes and all this other stuff. And it showed that the rise in carbon dioxide, which was higher than it is now, is often good. There is a point, but we haven't reached that point at all. So that took her back a little bit. But we need to know what's going on with climate change. Climate change policies are being developed in order to devastate our economic structure and bankrupt capitalism. It is the second thing that they're really pushing, because they want the United States and all these other rich countries to divest their capital and help these others, and of course that's going to bring us down. The leaders of the Great Reset hope that the downfall of capitalism will also destroy democracy and make way for a new type of socialism. So this is being used as a tool. Okay? So Glenn Beck says this, the goal set is both shocking and wildly ambitious: to transform the global economy, eliminate free markets, impose a new, more easily controllable and malleable economic system, and change the way people think about private property and corporations. The reset part of the Great Reset is an allusion to pushing the reset button on the global economy. Now, I like what one of your musicians said to me just a little bit before when I brought up, well, we're going to deal with a Great Reset. And he said, yeah, what we really need is a Great Awakening again. And I said, yes, I'm going to quote you on that. He said, okay. He's the other guitarist here. Okay, here's a chart of their goals, really. This is put out by a Christian group. They want to eliminate national sovereignty and independence, destroy and replace the free enterprise economic system, eliminate private property, own nothing and be happy, because you'll be renting, just like a lot of the Chinese have to rent, and that will devastate our economy. Abolish Christianity is one of their key goals. A cashless society, guess what? They're pushing for that now with digital currency, so everything will be just digital. Yeah, it'll be convenient in a lot of ways, but what if you fall on the wrong side of the government? They push a button and, oh, my credit card doesn't work anymore. What's wrong with that? They'll shut you off that easily. So we've got to be aware of all these things. Cashless society, universal income. So that really worked in Russia when doctors got just about as much as the person shoveling coal. Didn't get very good doctors that way because they weren't as interested. And society falls apart. So this is what Glenn Beck says about the hidden goals. The Great Reset is not really about helping the poor or saving the planet. It is about making the rich richer and expanding the power of the ruling class. I really agree with him on that from what I've seen. Goals that many elites have shared across cultures, historical eras, and geographies. They're sinners. They want that power. There's that lust for power. The same three temptations that were there in the Garden of Eden and all through time. Lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. And we deal with it, and they deal with it. And here you have 4 of the leaders. We're all in this together. Censorship, dictatorship of the billionaire, crushing the small businesses. There's Klaus Schwab, globalism. And believe it or not, the last one is not Fauci. That's supposed to be Bill Gates, because he's pushing the vaccines around the world. Some of that's good, but creating fear and buying up all the agricultural farms. Why? Because he wants to get rid of all the beef, all the animals. So they have their agenda, and they've gained a lot. So what are our responses? Has Christianity become irrelevant to many? More and more people are apathetic toward God. We see that in our own communities. They don't think that God is relevant for their lives. We have a rise in the nuns. In England now, they took the last census. They don't have the majority saying that they're Christian anymore, 49%. Because there are so many who are saying they're not atheists, but they're nuns, N-O-N-E-S. They're kind of religious. They grew up maybe in a Christian background, but they find it's irrelevant for most of what they do. They don't want God to dictate how they live. This is my life. It's all about me. They don't want God to tell them that they can't kill their unborn children. That's my body, though it's not anymore. They don't want God to tell them that on that point, I was reading a report that was put out about the number of deaths in the world last year. What do you think was the highest number of deaths? I'll put it out right there. Abortion. We don't think of that as being the leading cause of death in the world, but the World Health Organization put out an official number of 44 million in the world. But it's, with their numbers and everything, it really goes up to about 73 million were murdered last year in abortion. That's one year around the world. Next leading cause of death, 2 million in communicable diseases other than COVID, 1.2 million in COVID, but there were 500,000 in the regular flu. Every year, typically before COVID, there would be 600,000 or so people worldwide who died of the flu, 60,000 or so in the United States. And it was just pushed down because of the COVID anyway. They don't want God to tell them that they can't fulfill their sexual lusts in any way that satisfies their desires, and we're seeing what that is doing to corrupt our society all the way down to kindergarten. It's so sad to see what's happening with the library system and reading of those terrible books, introducing this to innocent children and making them, it's just abuse, in my opinion. They don't want God to interfere with the way they think, act, speak, and live their lives. This is my life. God, stay out of it. They want to be their own God and live their life in a way that is most fulfilling to them. And that's really what it boils down to. They replace God with themselves as God. However, they also do not want to see that their lives are a sham, their relationships are hollow. The words that come out of their mouths and hearts are disgraceful and derogatory. There's so many things that I cannot even look at. There are so many fiction writers that I'd like to be able to read, but I cannot pick up their book because I will not deal with what they say in between and so on. It's just bad. Their sexual lusts have only brought them down to despicable, unthinkable actions, and you see that in the news every day. Their minds have become illogical. They push away logic. They despise the truth and wallow in relativistic lies. Claiming to be wise, they become fools. And that we see over and over again. Now, the worldview of a Christian is much different. As I showed in the last time, Galatians 5:22-26, fruit of the Spirit. There you go. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. We need to live by the Spirit. We need to show that to the world. Yes, that is our job. And we need to influence the world so that they will see the great advantage of this type of lifestyle. Are we doing that in our own lives, with our own relationships, with our families? We just had Christmas. We had all those gatherings. Did we use that to really promote Christ to our family? Look at God's wrath. We know this well. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. That's our society. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made. So creation tells us a great story. So they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. And you see in this passage afterwards, exchange, the great reset or the great exchange. It brings it in. Exchange the glory of immortal God for images. Exchange the truth about God for a lie. The women exchange natural relations for those that are contrary to nature. Homosexuality is a sin. We need to be upfront about that. It is not what God designed. And yet we have, and I'm sure in this congregation you have relatives and friends and maybe even children who have adopted this lifestyle. And they've adopted it because our world is sinful. We need to love them, and we need to refute the error as much as we can. But, and it's hard. And we talk about our nation as being, you know, a government that should be neutral. But why have we made it secular? Why have we said that secularism is the system that we need to adopt in our government? Why not Christian principles? That's how it started. But that's where we have let down, and our Congress and our government officials have let us down. Because they say, oh, I've got to keep my Christianity out of this. No, you need to put your Christianity in because that's going to influence for the good. Okay? And so we've seen the consequences. They are full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, maliciousness, gossip, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, inventors of evil, disobedient to parents, foolish, faithless, heartless, ruthless. That's our world today, isn't it? Because they have gone away from God. We need to bring them back to God. And they've taken this from Satan. You shall be as gods. They want a secular kingdom where there is no God because they want to be their own God. We see the rise of wokeness in the military. This is heartbreaking because we have Fort Jackson right there at Columbia. We have a lot of chaplains that I know and admire, and they have a tough job. They tell me more and more that this diversity training is just devastating. And the DEI agenda, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is blatantly prejudiced. The equity is hypocritically unequal. The demand for inclusion seeks to exclude anyone who will not accept the DEI agenda. There is obfuscation rather than clarity, hatred rather than love, anger rather than joy, evil rather than goodness, and sexual immorality rather than self-control. Tell me, have you ever seen the proponents of this great reset joyful? Alive? Welcoming? No. That should tell you a lot about what's inside, what's guiding them. And again, remember that they are created in the image of God. We need to win them over to the truth because they are following lies and to their devastation. And we need to work with that. So questions? How do we get to this point? We'll talk more about that in our next session. Why has there been such a massive move away from a Christian worldview? It's not a mystery. We've been dealing with that for decades and centuries, especially after certain things like Darwin and evolution and the fall of science. What can we do to reach the woke culture that has turned away from Jesus Christ? So that's what I want to focus on. The next session that we do will be really focusing on a book by Owen Strachan, Wokeness and Christianity. And he's got a lot of great things to say. But we do have a divide, and that's why I bring out these words again. In order to break through this godly anarchy, we need to first understand what they believe. We also need to understand what we as Christians believe so that we can defend what we believe and refute the error of the spirit of the world. So, our key apologetic guide will be to understand, defend, and refute. Okay? Let me pray. God, we really do appreciate you being our God and being patient with us, but help us to take these things in so that we can use them for your glory. And I pray this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
This concludes this session. We'll start back at here in just a few minutes at 10:30. You have a chance to go to the bathroom, get a drink, what you need to do, and then we'll get started with some worship in our regular service time, and then we'll have a third session here in just a little bit, okay? God bless you. Thank you for being here.